Hello everyone, and welcome to War in Middle-earth, a series where I take you through all of the major wars and conflicts throughout the history of Middle-earth, from the First Age to the Fourth Age. In this episode, we look at the first wars in Beleriand, fought between the Elves and the newly returned Dark Lord Morgoth. These wars are significant because they were the first time Elves and Orcs fought each other in large-scale battles, and for many Elves, it was the first time they had fought at all. These battles would help set the stage for the major conflicts of the First Age, which would eventually bring ruin to almost everyone involved. In the year 1495, the Years of the Trees, Morgoth returns to Middle-earth after slaying Finwë, king of the Noldor, stealing the Silmarils, and destroying the Two Trees of Valinor. In other words, he's committed murder, theft, and vandalism all in one go. He's been kept prisoner in Valinor for 3,000 years after being defeated by the other Valar during the War for the sake of the Elves, and he's now eager to return to Middle-earth where he can once again rule the continent that had been forsaken by the Valar. But the Middle-earth he returns to is completely different to the one he left. Lands which were once dark and empty are now populated by elves and dwarves, and in a few short decades, the race of men will awaken in the east. To Morgoth, this is unacceptable because to him, everything not of his making must be destroyed or corrupted. In other words, he's the ultimate crybaby. And fortunately for him, his servants who remained in Middle-earth during his captivity, such as Sauron and Gothmog, haven't been slack either. Slowly but surely, darkness was returning to Middle-earth, and orcs and other evil creatures started to roam the wilds. Even centuries before Morgoth's return, the Elves of Beleriand became aware that conflict was on the horizon, and with the helps of the dwarves of Nogrod and Belegost, they began to arm themselves for future wars. When Morgoth returned to Middle-earth, the stage was set, and all that was required was for the Dark Lord to give the order to attack. A mere 20 years after arriving in Middle-earth, Morgoth was ready to begin his assault on Beleriand, the wide and peaceful land south of his rebuilt fortress at Angband. A raid against Morgoth were the Sindar, the Grey Elves of Beleriand, ruled by King Elufingol in Doriath, and Lord Círdan the Shipwright in the havens of the Falas. In the east of Beleriand were the Lyquendi, the Green Elves of Osiriand, ruled by King Denethor, who had only recently come to Beleriand after fleeing their homelands in Eriador to the east. Despite the Sindar being numerous, they were fairly spread out across Beleriand, many of them living in scattered, defenseless communities, far from the power bases of Doriath and the Falas. In his classic, vague style, Tolkien never actually gives the numbers for the battle, but I'm willing to make an estimate based on what we do know. For Morgoth, his armies, consisting of orcs and trolls, likely numbered in the high tens of thousands, possibly nearing 100,000. For the elves, the main power would be Doriath, who would likely field an army of above 10,000, whereas the Green Elves and the Valar for him, considerably weaker, would probably number no more than 5,000. Give or take a few thousand, and like I said, these numbers aren't canon, so they could be entirely different. Scattered groups of elves across Beleriand would likely add more to these numbers, but these groups were either wiped out, fled, or proved too insignificant to make a difference to the major battles. Morgoth's plan was quite simple. His army would split into two, one taking western Beleriand and the other taking eastern Beleriand. His armies would pillage through these open lands, killing or enslaving as they went, isolating the Sindar and the Lyquendi from each other, from which they could be easily destroyed. In 1497 of the Years of the Trees, Morgoth began his assault, and it went much to plan. His armies poured through the undefended passes into Beleriand, ravaging and burning as they went. The elves, however, were not caught entirely at unawares, and an army under King Fingol marched east out of Doriath to intercept Morgoth's eastern army, while an army of green elves from Osiriand marched west. It was at the hill of Amon-Ereb where the first major battle in Beleriand was fought, resulting in the destruction of Morgoth's eastern force, as it was caught between King Fingol's army and King Denethor's army. Those orcs that escaped the battle fled east, only to be destroyed by the dwarves who resided in the Blue Mountains. However, the lightly armed and armoured Green Elves took heavy losses, including King Denethor himself. After the battle, the mourning Green Elves decided to never again take part in the wars against Morgoth, never take a new king, and returned home to Osiriand, never to leave. Some would call them cowards, but in hindsight, it was a pretty smart move. In the west, things were going much better for Morgoth. Círdan sallied forth to fight the Western army, but being greatly outnumbered, he was defeated and driven back into the coastal cities of Eglarast and Brithombar, where he was besieged. In the east, King Fingol decided that he had neither the strength or the time to rescue Círdan and his people, so he opted to retreat into Doriath, where he could be protected by the Girdle of Melian, a magical barrier that would keep away all of his foes. This is Middle-earth's version of a dick move. With the Lyquendi out of the war, with Doriath on the defensive, and with Círdan besieged in the Falas, it seemed like Morgoth's victory was assured. As it came to be known, the first Battle of Beleriand started as a strategic victory for Morgoth. It would take time, but ultimately he would destroy the Elven realms one by one. Until something unexpected happened. In the north, at a place called Losgar, landed the fleet of Feanor and his 7 sons, eager for vengeance against Morgoth. This was both a surprise to Morgoth and the Elves of Beleriand, who never expected the Noldor to return to Middle-earth. In Angband, Morgoth was near to panic, but he knew he still had time to move. The Noldor had come for him, but if he could throw them back into the sea before they could establish domains in Middle-earth, he could still achieve victory. He emptied Angband of his reserves and ordered his western army to end the siege of the Falas. All efforts would be directed at destroying Feanor. After burning their fleet, the Noldor, likely numbering in the tens of thousands, although a large part of these would be non-combatants, encamped on the shores of Lake Mithrin, being unfamiliar with these new lands. Morgoth's reserve army poured through the northern passes of Ered Wefren, and they ambushed the Noldor as they were encamped. Despite being ambushed, the Noldor won a crushing victory, because in those days, the Noldor were at the height of their power and filled with thirst for vengeance. Morgoth's reserve army was quickly defeated and the remnants were driven back towards Angband, with Feanor himself in hot pursuit. In the south, Morgoth's western force hurried north, but they were ambushed by a force of Noldor under Celegorm, the third son of Feanor, as they passed through the pass of Sirion, and they were encircled and destroyed at a place called Eifel Sirion by the remainder of Feanor's sons. Yet as the sons of Feanor were busy mopping up the remnants of Morgoth's armies in the south, Feanor charged north, almost reaching the gates of Angband itself. With only a few companions, he was assaulted by Balrogs until only he was left standing. Despite taking numerous deadly wounds, he laughed as he fought because he was an absolute mad lad and probably a bit insane at this point. He was eventually struck down by Gothmog, Lord of the Balrogs, but before he could be finished off, his sons arrived, driving the Balrogs away. But Feanor died of his wounds shortly afterwards, discovering a way to self-cremate in the process. This was known as the Dagor-nuin-Giliath, the Battle Under the Stars, because the sun and the moon had not yet arisen. And it would have been a perfect victory for the Noldor had Feanor not been slain towards the battle's end. Immediately afterwards, Morgoth sued for peace. He met with Maedhros, Feanor's elder son and now de facto leader of the Noldor, and although both were planning on betraying each other, Morgoth was the better betrayer and Maedhros was taken prisoner. He was hanged from his wrist above Angband, and Morgoth threatened to kill him unless the Noldor left Beleriand. Instead, the Noldor retreated back to Mithrin, once again taking camp. Morgoth's armies were destroyed, but now he had a bargaining chip, and for 20 years the Noldor did nothing. But for Morgoth, it was about to get worse. The host of Fingolfin, far larger than Feanor's host, finally arrived in Middle-earth after crossing the Helcarax, the grounding ice in the north. Morgoth immediately dispatched what forces he had left to deal with Fingolfin, but like the others, that army was destroyed during the Battle of Lamoth, but not before slaying Argon, Fingolfin's third son. You won't find Argon or the Battle of Lamoth in the Silmarillion because they came very late in Tolkien's writings, and in the Silmarillion, Fingolfin arrives without bloodshed and Argon seemingly doesn't exist. So if you ever feel down, remember that Argon is a character that simply existed just to die, and that a lot of Tolkien fans probably don't even know who he is. A few years later, Fingon, the elder son of Fingolfin, rescues Maedhros and Morgoth finds himself at the mercy of the Noldor once again. But the Noldor never act on that advantage, and Morgoth is allowed to recover, although that's a story for a future episode. It's hard to feel sorry for Morgoth, considering he was the embodiment of pure evil, but he didn't really do a whole lot wrong during these battles. Yes, he ultimately lost every battle, but that's because his enemies were overpowered. On a strategic level, his plans were pretty good, and if not for the timely arrival of the Noldor, the Sindar would have all been destroyed and Beleriand would have been his. Once he fortified Beleriand, he would be able to establish dominance across Middle-earth. But, as the saying goes, if you don't want someone to cross an ocean to kill you, then you probably shouldn't piss them off in the first place. Morgoth, knowing Feanor quite well himself, probably should have predicted that the Noldoran king with severe anger issues would follow him back to Middle-earth if he pissed him off. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it. The plan is for War in Middle-earth to take up the slot of every second video, so leave feedback, ask questions, and remember, if you ever end up fighting alone against a group of Balrogs, probably take the advice of Gandalf and run away.